The year was 1942. Deep in the southern desert of Libya, near the small town of Sirte, a child opened his eyes inside a Bedouin tent. His name was given Muammar Muhammad Abu Minyar al-Gaddafi. His father, Muhammad Abu Minyar, was a simple nomadic shepherd. He owned a few camels and goats, and his family moved with the seasons across the burning Sahara. There were no walls, no roof, just the open sky, the endless sand, and the howling desert wind. Little Muammar was different from other children from the very beginning. While others chased goats and played in the dunes, he sat quietly and watched. He watched the Italian soldiers patrol the roads. He watched his people bow their heads. He watched his father work himself to the bone and still go hungry. And he thought, there is oil beneath this sand. There is gold in this desert. Then why are my people starving? Why are we slaves in our own land? Libya at that time was an Italian colony. The Italians had invaded in 1911 and ruled with an iron hand. Libyan people were second-class citizens on their own soil. This humiliation burned deep into young Muammar's heart and planted a fire that would never go out. Muammar's early education was in Sirte. Then he moved to Saba for higher schooling. This was the turning point of his life. It was here, in a small room, that he first heard the voice of Gamal Abdel Nasser on the radio. Nasser, the Egyptian president, was the hero of the entire Arab world at that time. He had nationalized the Suez Canal, thrown out the British, and raised the banner of Arab nationalism. His words were electric. Arabs must rise. Arabs must unite. The West has stolen from us long enough. The young Muammar was electrified. He became obsessed with Nasser. He read everything about him, memorized his speeches, imitated his style. In his mind, a dream took shape. One day, I will do for Libya what Nasser did for Egypt. At school, Muammar gathered like-minded friends. They held secret meetings, whispered about revolution, and made bold plans for a future where Libya would be free. When school authorities discovered these activities, Muammar was expelled. But he didn't stop. He enrolled in a school in Misrata, completed his education, and then made his next big decision. He would join the military. Because he understood something that few young men understood at his age. Real power comes from the barrel of a gun. In 1963, Muammar Gaddafi entered the Benghazi Military Academy. He was sharp, focused, and driven by a purpose that most of his classmates didn't have. Inside the academy, he carefully and quietly built something dangerous, a secret revolutionary organization called the Free Officers Movement. This was directly inspired by the organization that had brought Nasser to power in Egypt in 1952. Gaddafi and his trusted circle of friends worked for years in the shadows. They recruited sympathetic officers, studied military strategy, observed the weaknesses of the monarchy, and waited patiently for the right moment. In 1966, Gaddafi was sent to England for advanced military training. He saw the Western world for the first time. The wealth, the freedom, the skyscrapers, the lifestyle. Many young men from poor countries are seduced by such things and never go home in their hearts. Not Gaddafi. He returned more determined than ever. He had seen what the West had, and he believed his people deserved the same, but on their terms, not the West's terms. September 1st, 1969. King Idris of Libya was in Turkey for medical treatment. The country was quiet. The night was dark and still. Then, silently, like shadows, Gaddafi's free officers moved. Military units seized radio stations, airports, government buildings, and army barracks across the country. It was a perfectly planned operation. There was minimal bloodshed. By the time the sun rose over the Sahara Desert, Libya was a completely different country. In the early morning hours, a young, confident voice crackled over the radio. People of Libya, in the name of freedom, your armed forces have overthrown the corrupt monarchy. The era of darkness is over. The Libyan Arab Republic has been born. That voice belonged to a 27-year-old army captain, Muammar Gaddafi. The world was stunned. Who was this young man? Where had he come from? How had a shepherd's son from a desert tent seized control of an entire nation? Once in power, Gaddafi moved with incredible speed. His first act shocked the world. He ordered American and British military bases closed and gave the foreign soldiers 24 hours to leave. The United States and Britain had expected to keep their bases and influence as usual. Instead, they found themselves packing their bags and heading home. Next, he nationalized the oil companies. Western corporations had been extracting Libya's enormous oil wealth and taking most of the profits back to Europe and America. Gaddafi ended those agreements and redirected the oil revenue toward Libyan citizens. He introduced free healthcare and free education for all Libyans. He built roads, schools, and hospitals. He gave land to farmers. He raised the minimum wage. For ordinary Libyans, especially the poor and the rural communities, life genuinely improved. He banned alcohol, imposed Islamic laws, and removed all traces of Italian and Western cultural influence from public life. Arabic became the only official language. The poor people loved him. For the first time, they felt like they mattered. For the first time, the oil beneath their feet was actually benefiting them. Gaddafi was not content to simply be a ruler. He wanted to be a thinker, a philosopher, a guide for all of humanity. In 1975, he published his famous Green Book, a slim volume in which he outlined his political theory, which he called the Third Universal Theory. He argued that both capitalism and communism had failed humanity. Democracy, as practiced in the West, was fake. People just voted for politicians who then ignored them. Communism crushed individual freedom. His solution? Direct democracy, where the people themselves governed through local communities without politicians or parties. He renamed Libya the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, with Jamahiriya being a word he invented himself, roughly meaning state of the masses. On paper, it sounded revolutionary and beautiful. In practice, however, Gaddafi himself remained the absolute ruler. The committees could discuss, but Gaddafi decided. The people could speak, but Gaddafi had the final word. He was, in truth, a philosopher king, and all philosopher kings are still kings. Gaddafi loved the spotlight, and the world could not ignore him. He supported revolutionary movements around the world, from the IRA in Ireland to liberation movements in Africa and Palestine. He believed he was fighting global imperialism and helping the oppressed. He picked fights with the most powerful nations on earth. He called Western leaders puppets, hypocrites, and colonialists. He stood at the United Nations podium and delivered marathon speeches, sometimes going on for hours, while the world either watched in fascination or horror. In 1986, following a terrorist bombing in Berlin that killed American soldiers, U.S. President Ronald Reagan ordered airstrikes on Libya. Bombs fell on Tripoli and Benghazi. One of Gaddafi's own children was reportedly killed. He emerged from the rubble defiant, calling Reagan a mad dog. The world had never seen a leader quite like him. In the Lockerbie bombing of 1988, a Pan Am flight was blown up over Scotland, killing 270 people. Libya was blamed. International sanctions were imposed. Libya became one of the most isolated nations on earth. The economy suffered, and ordinary Libyans paid the price for their leaders' adventures. But there was another story running beneath the grand narrative, darker, grimmer, and impossible to ignore. Those who dared to oppose Gaddafi disappeared. Political prisoners filled Libya's jails. There were no free elections, no free press, no real opposition parties. Amnesty International and human rights organizations documented torture, executions, and systematic repression. In 1996, in a single horrific incident, over 1,200 prisoners were reportedly massacred at the Abu Salim prison in Tripoli. Families of the victims were not even told their loved ones were dead. The regime continued to collect living expenses from them for years. Libya under Gaddafi was a land of contradictions. Free health care, but no freedom of speech. Free education, but no freedom of thought. Oil wealth distributed, but only to those loyal to the regime. He dressed in flamboyant robes and gold. He traveled with an all-female bodyguard unit called the Amazonian Guard. He slept in a Bedouin tent, even when visiting foreign capitals, as if to say, I have never forgotten the desert, and I never will. He was bizarre, theatrical, and terrifying all at once. In the 2000s, Gaddafi turned his gaze toward Africa. He poured billions of dollars into African nations, funding governments, building infrastructure, and buying influence. He dreamed of a United States of Africa, a single, unified African superpower that could challenge Europe and America and end Western dominance of the continent forever. In 2009, the African Union honored him with the title of King of Kings of Africa. He accepted the title with great ceremony, dressed in robes covered in African imagery, surrounded by dozens of traditional African kings and chiefs. He was genuinely popular in many parts of Africa, particularly among leaders who resented Western interference in their affairs. For them, Gaddafi was a symbol of defiance, a man who had the money, the will, and the courage to say no to the powerful. Meanwhile, back at home, things were slowly simmering toward a breaking point. After Gaddafi, Libya did not find peace. It found chaos. Different factions, militias, and foreign powers carved the country up. Civil war followed. Hundreds of thousands of refugees fled. The institutions that Gaddafi had never allowed to develop because he wanted to be everything himself simply did not exist. Libya today is still struggling to find stability. As for Gaddafi's legacy, historians and ordinary people continue to argue about it passionately. Some say he was a hero, a man who stood up to Western imperialism, gave his people free education and health care, and refused to bow to the most powerful nations on earth. Others say he was a tyrant, a man who murdered his own people, supported terrorism, destroyed Libya's institutions, and ruled through fear for 4 decades. Perhaps the truth is that he was both, and neither. He was a product of his time and his land. A boy born in a tent in the Sahara, who rose to challenge the world, who dreamed too big and ruled too harshly, and who died in the same dust from which he had emerged. The desert gave birth to him,
And in the end, the desert took him back.